Our guest today is Ed Kociela, author, investigative news reporter, writer, and an encyclopedia of education on various aspects of human rights. Today, we are embarking upon some of the problems involved in American polygamy. Welcome, Ed.
Good to be here, Rebecca. Well, Rebecca, people are always asking what's new in polygamy in the United States today, and the answer is really nothing. What we have is a continuation of what's been going on for many, many, many years now, and there seems to be no end in sight. We have communities out there that are the same as they were when they were first formed, very, very backward, very, very quiet, very secretive. So as far as what's changed, nothing. Warren Jeffs, he's still in charge of his church. From behind bars, he still issues orders and has his revelations and passes down to his people exactly how he expects them to behave out in Short Creek. So when people are asking what's new, nothing. We have had so much lack of oversight in the state of Utah from two previous attorneys general, Mark Shurtleff and John Swallow, that they have refused, they have neglected to enforce the laws, to the bigamy, polygamy laws that are on the books there. We see it going into the Supreme Court now. We see it going everywhere, but it's nothing has changed. We have the same world out there as we have had for many, many decades. The power structure out in Short Creek seems to be pretty much intact, but we do see that a gentleman by the name of Willie Jessup seems to have taken over an awful lot of ownership of property out there. We were at a courthouse auction for the property where they built this huge compound for Warren Jeffs after he was in prison. So that way when he made his grand return, he and his wives could live there. Well, that went up on the block in the Washington County Tax Assessor's Office and was auctioned off to Willie Jessup, who had won a civil suit against Warren and the FLDS Church, and basically just turned over part of the millions of dollars he had won in that decision to claim that property. He has also ended up with several other pieces out there. So he's the new big landlord out in Short Creek. He was Warren's bodyguard. He was his spokesman. He was the one who helped make sure that the El Dorado facility was built. He oversaw it all, and he is regarded, as a friend of mine, Sam Brower, says, as a thug in the community, as an enforcer for Warren Jeffs over the years. So the power structure remains pretty much intact. There's been word that there was this great falling out between Warren and Willie. I don't believe it for a second, but we'll see how that turns out. We know that he's owning most of the property out there right now. We also have a situation where the state has actually laid claim on some of the back taxes on the homes that are there that are owned by the FLDS Church, and have displaced the people that were living in them. So a tent city has sort of sprouted up out in the community where people are actually, families are living in tents. They have evicted the people who were living there for back taxes. And Utah has a fairly reasonable tax rate. The amounts of money for the homes, it's not outrageous amounts of money. It's just the principle of not paying the taxes on the properties out there. And the state has finally, after years of court disputes and the oversight of the fiduciary who was appointed by the court, who ended up in some trouble himself, Bruce Wisen, they have finally come down and evicted some of the people that were living in those homes. And it's a really mixed feeling, because you look and you say, these are families with children, and they've been displaced, and they're living in tents in this kind of field area that's been set up as a campground, if you will. So, you have to feel sorry for those kids and not having an actual home to live in.
Hasn't always the FLDS taught that they should not pay taxes to the United States government, that was paying taxes was against their religion, basically. Taking taxes is part of their religion. Paying them is not.
Well, it's part of the bleeding the beast syndrome that they have. You know, they will take all that they can from the federal government as retribution for when the government insisted that they give up polygamy to become part of the United States for Utah. They have held it as retribution, and this constant inborn hatred of the federal government that exists throughout Utah. It's not only a very conservative place politically where they go and believe in the heavy states' rights thing, they also have this inbred distrust, dislike of the federal government because of the perception of persecution from the federal government for polygamy, persecution because of their religion. And if you read some of the literature that the fundamentalists have, they say how the originators of the church, the fundamentalists, the very beginning, Joseph Smith, his brother, and the people who were moving across the country, were chased from town to town. We know that distaste with what was going on back then had more to do than simply polygamy. We know how the groups moved into towns, took over the local governments because they had more people that were actually there and voting. We know they took over industry. They took over the shops, the stores, the homes, everything that they could. If you did not trade with them, you did not trade with anybody because they soon had the economic power. You went to them for the clothing, for the food, for the implements that you would use on your farm. You traded with them, and they ran the other businesses out of business. So, you know, they would also, because of the voting bloc they had, vote in their people into the town councils as the sheriffs, as the marshals, the elected officials in the area. And because they were able to do this so successfully as they moved from town to town, that's where an awful lot of the distrust and the problems occurred.
Well, what's changed, Ed? They're doing it still.
Well, yes, they are. Except, you know, it's funny when they have their elections. If you look at what happens and look at the election results for out in the Short Creek area, you will notice that if it happens to be a presidential election, they will vote for the local agenda, the town council, the mayor, the assessors, all of that sort of thing, the county and state officials. But when it comes to voting for president, nobody votes for president because they believe Warren Jeffs is the president of the United States.
What's really interesting to me is that they tell you who to vote for in the church meetings, as we know. They actually tell you. And if you take a look at it, Warren Jeffs, with his Yearning for Zion compound, was close and maybe even exceeded the voting bloc of that county in Texas before he was exposed for what he really was doing.
Well, again, that goes back to what happened as the original members of the LDS Church moved west, you know, from New York to Illinois to Missouri and onward to Utah. That's what we were just talking about, the groups of people that could come in, overtake a little town. Nauvoo at one point was one of the largest cities in the state of Illinois. It was only surpassed by Chicago. It was the second largest city in the state of Illinois, and that was because of the settlement that they had there.
Well, the Mormons and the basic Mormons, fundamentalists, really did a wonderful job in succeeding on that very thing, moving west.
Yes, they did. And, you know, quite frankly, the state of Utah has evolved into a Mormon theocracy, mainstream fundamentalist. There is a very tight control over the state legislature. So, you know, in effect, it's still very similar today. The legislature gets its marching orders basically from Salt Lake City.
And Salt Lake City and that legislature will not uphold the Constitution of the United States in regard to polygamy being illegal. And basically, the Constitution of the state of Utah, which was granted statehood on the condition that they abandoned polygamy.
Exactly. And, you know, we've seen that situation completely torn to shambles. I mean, Mark Shurtleff was the first attorney general to say, I will not prosecute crimes of bigamy or polygamy. His successor, John Swallow, took the same path. And these were public statements. These were policies that were established by the two top law enforcement officials in the state of Utah, which sets precedence, and it marks itself down the line into the various county attorney offices, where they say, well, if the state policy is that we will not prosecute polygamy or bigamy, why should we bother with it? It trickles back down then from their offices, from the county attorney offices, to the county sheriffs. The county sheriffs say, well, if we go out there and investigate polygamy and bigamy, then, you know, the county attorney isn't going to prosecute it. So why should we even bother? Which means that there is even less oversight out in these communities, which means that they get away with more. There are more child brides that are placed into marriage. There is more domestic violence abuse that occurs. There is more fraud that occurs as a result, because they are continuing with the bleeding the beast, you know, the welfare benefits, and it just continues. And that's the greater context of polygamy that people don't seem to understand. You know, we say all the time, I do, you need to look at the context. This is not simply a matter of a lifestyle preference. This is not a simple matter of consenting adults doing what they wish in the privacy of their own lives. This is something that ripples down, that old domino effect thing that we hear about, that people talk about all the time. It starts here. You know, the federal government has its laws, the state of Utah has its laws, but suddenly you have a couple of guys in charge that make a sharp right turn and say, sorry, we are not going to enforce those laws.
There's a lot more to it than that also, Ed. Follow the money trail, and you find out more than you wanted to know. Tell us the money trail.
Well, we actually at one point were establishing a trail on the money that went through one of their consultants, if you will, who actually had or holds a position in the Utah State Legislature. And we at one point followed the money all the way to Bermuda and saw that what they had built in the FLDS organization was very similar to what the mafia had built in the way it was structured with its money laundering and businesses. You would have the primary structure organization, and then under that you would have these various little companies and corporations that were formed, and the money would flow down into these companies and corporations, and it would go in the form of loans and investments and whatever, and it would keep trickling down to some of these dummy companies that were just on paper. And the money would then eventually disappear while it was actually being funneled out of state, out of country. And you know, there are some legitimate businesses down there. They're very good at building the trusses, you know, the infrastructure for a home or a commercial building. They're very good with their metal shop out there. In fact, they were so good that they landed several government contracts to work for the Department of Defense in the aerospace industry. They were very good at that sort of thing. They were also very good at creating dummy companies and corporations where money could be filtered through and laundered and sent out of the country. God knows how much money they actually have. I have talked to people who have been out there, actually walked into where the food warehouse is. There's a room in there, and they were keeping large amounts of cash in there. This person that I know said he had never, ever seen such a stack of money, such a cache of money in his life. And it was all there. Boxes, suitcases, vaults. It was just all there, and it was being moved. You know, where'd it go? So the money thing, follow the money. Well, money is influence. How much money did individuals give to the Shirtlift and Swallow campaigns? How much money has gone into the Gary Herbert campaign that comes from southern Utah? Very conservative area, and under the guise of giving the campaign finances, you've got 10,000 polygamous families out there donating $100 here and there. The money is probably given to them by the church to donate and say, give it to this guy so that way he can be reelected. Um, it starts to add up. And in a state like Utah, when you're talking about $1 million or whatever, that gets tossed out to the general legislature and state officials. That's a lot of influence that can be bought. And it's easy to see where Shirtlift and Swallow went along and said, we're not going to prosecute these guys. They're good people. Well, Shirtlift and Swallow are now facing severe criminal penalties for campaign irregularities, for accepting bribes, and are in the midst of a huge scandal. The guy that was overseeing, Bruce Wisen, who was overseeing the United Order Plan, which was the controlling organization for the finances and property of the FLDS Church, was up on charges of soliciting a prostitute. The judge in the case has retired, except she has held on to oversight of this one particular case that she was handling. Why? Why is this allowed to happen? Why do they continue to handle all of this property and this money? Why do they continue to remain in power? Nobody is being held accountable, Rebecca, and that's the big problem. And you can point it out to the people, to the government, to whoever, till you're blue in the face. Nothing happens.
Well, Ed, I think you left out one very important thing. The average polygamist family gets their basic income where, especially the plural wives, and where does that money go? I don't think people have any kind of concept that the basic money, the massive basic money coming into polygamy is government funds. Explain that.
Well, what happens, Rebecca, is it's that bleeding the beast term that I've used several times. And what occurs is that the spiritual wives who are accumulated by a man will have children, and the birth certificate will say father unknown, which immediately qualifies the woman and the child for various levels of federal assistance, state assistance. And so they start collecting food stamps, Medicare, Medicaid, all of the different benefits that are available to single unwed mothers and children without fathers. And it can be a quite tidy sum. We figured it out at one point and saw that a man with 5 wives, 5 spiritual wives, and each of those wives has about 5 children, which is actually fairly low, takes in approximately $13,000 a month.
Government funds.
$1,000 a month in federal, state, and local government money. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. Even if you have a large, that's still a lot of money, particularly when you are not paying a house payment because the church owns the house, when most of the vehicles that are brought into the community are pretty much church purchased, unless you're at the lower end and you're working for minimal money. All of your needs and whatever are pretty much taken care of in the communal atmosphere of the FLDS Church. So this money, in turn, goes into purchasing goods that are used in the Bishop warehouse down there, the food, the items that are purchased, and we've seen them at Costco, we've seen them at Walmart, loading up van loads, truckloads of food and goods that are purchased off of these welfare cards. We hear about all of this welfare abuse that's supposedly going on in the country, and quite frankly, the comparisons with the undocumented aliens that come in and what's really happening with with the polygamous society is by far, by per capita, the polygamous society is raping the welfare system. Undocumented aliens that come in and work in the United States are never getting a piece of that pie, or very rarely. They're putting in a social security card that's got phony numbers that are just punched in and drawn out of the air. They never collect on that, or very, very rarely collect on that. The polygamists out in Short Creek, they're checking up on that every day. They're getting money out of the federal bank every day, and they're sucking down the welfare money. It's more than $400,000 a month that goes into that community, as a reference that we got from Buster Johnson, the Mojave County supervisor in Mojave County, Arizona. They're taking that money, bleeding the beast, if you will, and using it for food, for clothing, for other items that they don't even see. You know, when Warren was in jail, he got the brilliant idea that the women and children needed to sacrifice, that fasting and eating only beans and water was the way to get by. And okay, so what happened with the rest of what that money went to purchase? What happened to it?
The interesting thing is it's more than just the family welfare money. When they go out in the middle of nowhere and incorporate in the name of a church or a town, they are eligible for government funds for roads, schools, post offices, etc., etc.
Well, exactly. And as we found recently, the water company in Hildale, Utah, has been giving money, has been taking money and giving it to Warren Jeffs out of a municipality, out of a municipal utility. They had been taking money and handing it over to Warren and the church. This is a municipal utility, the water department.
Well, they've been given money for schools for years, yet we have kids coming out of there that can't even read. What about that?
Well, that's part of the tradition of the FLDS Church, is that they encourage heartily homeschooling, which means that they become, again, unaccountable for the education of their children. Yeah, they have some great buildings out there. We have seen the schools. They're really nice, modern, clean buildings with weeds 7 feet, 8 feet tall, because nobody's out there. The playgrounds are overtaken by weeds and sagebrush. The classrooms are empty because Warren has ordered it. As soon as a new school was built, a new elementary school was built out there, new desks, new books, new facilities all the way around. The minute it was built and the staff was hired, teachers and administrators and all, Warren ordered that all children were to be removed from school and homeschooled. And the reason for the homeschooling is because that way you could place them into the local workforce, where they can go and work construction agencies, or they can go out into the fields and work, or the young girls can be placed in the merit.
These kids that go to work for the local businesses and construction and etc., there, the contractor work, these kids are child labor, are they not? That is not paid. They're working for God.
Absolutely. We've had situations in southern Utah were absolutely abysmal, where there were a number of valid contractors that would be bidding on city and county jobs. Several of the schools and several of the official city buildings throughout southern Utah have been built on the back of child labor and the FLDS construction companies. The companies that bid out the process, or the job, bid out the project, will add these companies to do some of the subcontracting work. So they will oversee what's going on, and then hire these companies from Short Creek to come in and actually do the work. You can go by these work sites and see kids 8 and 9 years old doing the cleanup. You could see kids 10, 12 kind of hustling around with wood and paint and nails and whatever else is needed. You could see some of the other kids driving backhoes or driving forklifts and working in the community. You could see some of the older boys who are actually doing some of the framing work, who are far too young and should be in school but are not. I've seen a high school that was built that way. I've seen a middle school that was built that way, both of them in Cedar City. The downtown Cedar City renovation that took place with City Hall and the facilities there was the same kind of situation where you had a primary contractor and the companies that came in to work under them were a part of the Short Creek construction business. Some of the local contractors who were legit and would not do that actually called OSHA and called the state in and said, we got kids running around out here that are doing this work. Well, these kids are trained from 7 and 8 years old that if a strange car pulls up and starts to park, get the hell out of Dodge, and they disappear, and they're very good at it. Kids are out laying in fields and hiding, and because they see the federal car or the state car pull up to investigate what's happening on that work site, and they scatter like cockroaches with the light. That's what's happening. The cities have contracted with these companies that actually go in and hire these FLDS companies as subcontractors. I've been in meetings where the legitimate contractors have turned around and said, look, this is what's happening. And the cities, because they have overburdened budgets, say, well, can you prove it? Well, we see it. We know it. It's the only way that they can meet that price, and we can't compete with it. Well, the city says, well, prove it. Go out there and show us. And they're so adept at hiding it that it's almost impossible because, as I said, when the investigators show up, these kids scatter to the four winds.
Well, also they're taught from the time of their birth that everybody in the outside world is evil, that Warren's a prophet, that everybody that isn't a polygamist is going to persecute and hate them, that it's dangerous to talk to them. I mean, I was raised like that. I know that's true.
Well, it is. And, you know, it's why this whole thing persists. And it's why there's such a shroud of secrecy around it all, because they will not talk. Even the ones who get away, the ones who speak, who write books, who do TV shows. Do you really think that they are telling it all? I think that there's a problem in that some of it is just so bad, so terrifying, so horrible, that even there, the voice of reason is still somewhat stifled, because you know as well as I do, Rebecca, you start talking to people from the outside world about this, and they look at you like you just landed from Mars.
Oh, of course. I know they look at me exactly like that. Exactly like that.
And I think that's a valid point, Rebecca, seriously, because people don't believe what's going on. They say, well, how could this be happening? This is 2015, man, that stuff doesn't happen. Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does. And it's been going on for a long time. And nobody is doing a damn thing to stop it. And that's what gets people angry, like me, Kara, the activists who try and say something about it, try to educate people, and get in return, well, you know, it's all a matter of freedom of religion and people should be able to do whatever they want in their own home. That's nonsense.
When did freedom of religion justify enslaving children? When did freedom of religion justify enslaving people through their children? These women can't leave or they can't have their children. They're bred like cattle. When's that freedom of religion?
Well, there is no freedom of religion that allows that. Where your rights are, where your Bill of Rights are, you are free to live and conduct yourself as you choose, as long as you do not interfere with another's life. I can say and do what I wish as long as it doesn't infringe upon another. And you know, that's where people fail to understand what our rights are really about. I can act and I can do and I can be and I can believe and I can say whatever I wish, as long as it doesn't infringe upon your rights. We guarantee our rights of civility among each other. You know, it's called civil rights, and that civil part of it is a very important part of defining what it is that we can and can't do. You know, I can't walk up to you and degrade you, and I can't slander you or libel you. I can say that I like your show, I don't like your show, I like your haircut, I don't like your haircut. Gee, that's a nice blouse or whatever. But you know what? I cannot under any stretch of the imagination, I cannot violate your personal and human rights. That's a restriction on the basic Bill of Rights. You cannot violate somebody's personal life.
But they do it every day. In the name of God, they do it every day. Ed, when we were born, from the time we had any consciousness at all, we were taught that if we did not obey the prophet and live polygamy, we would be destroyed. Now, that's coercion.
Exactly, and it's from cradle to grave. It happens from the very beginnings of understanding, and that's what we see: cradle to grave coercion. It's mind control. It is brainwashing, if you will. It is cultist activity, and that's what occurs. You have no control. My God, even when they leave the communities or are tossed out, the lost boys, the guys who get thrown out of the Short Creek community, they still, for the most part, spend the very beginning of their time wondering, what did we do wrong? What did we do wrong to get excommunicated from our church, to be thrown out from our community and our family? And usually the only thing they've done wrong was happen to be male and happen to be of age where they could be considering marriage, and there just aren't enough females to go around for the old men to disperse among themselves. That's what they've done wrong. They happen to have been born male.
But they don't understand that they didn't do anything wrong because they were always taught to live by an unrealistic, inhuman perfection.
Well, and it's not. And again, it's not. It's not even that. If they had misbehaved or if they had done something, it would be perhaps something to consider. But again, they will thin the herd, if you will, of the excess males who are young and not worthy or whatever, because they're not the elders. They're not part of the ruling group. They're not part of the money group. They're not in control. They're 18, 17-year-old, 16-year-old boys who just happen to be boys, and there are more boys at the time than there are girls. So rather than having to compete, they toss them out. And they end up in all kinds of trouble because they are uneducated, they are ill-prepared to go into a world that they know nothing about, that they don't trust, that they've been told from birth is out to quash them, to kill them, to eliminate them, to take down everything that they've been taught is holy in life.
Well, also then they eliminate those boys so they have non-existent competition for the young girls, and that's what it's all about.
Exactly. That's what happens, and we have seen instances of that. We know a young man who's living in LA in family care with foster parents and has no clue, absolutely no clue. We have seen some things that he has said. You know, he has a Facebook page, and we've seen some of his postings. And for example, when the bombing took place, the terrorist activity at the Boston Marathon, he was scared to death. He thought that Warren Jeff's prediction that there would be blood in the streets, explosions in the streets, if he wasn't released from jail, was taking place. And this kid, who was 16 at the time, was petrified that the walls of the prison that were holding Warren Jeffs were melting away and he was going to be free.
That is terrifying because that's what they're taught.
Yeah.
I remember all of our life being taught things that were horribly terrifying if we didn't do this. Our God was so mean, the devil was on unemployment and could only get a part-time job as a scapegoat because our God was going to destroy us at every turn. And it was part of the basic religion that you could destroy a person to save their soul, just like Islam.
Well, it also relates to concept of blood atonement, if you will, destroy a person. And we are, by the way, looks like the state of Utah is marching back to using firing squad as a form of capital punishment instead of other forms, which relates back to the old blood atonement days of the origins of the LDS Church.
You got to have a little blood, or it won't work in their religion.
That's right.
Blood is very important. Got to be a lot of it.
Yeah. So, are we, as we started out, are things different? Are we advancing? Have things changed? No. We haven't seen any changes or advancements. It's the same old stuff.
Well, Ed, I really appreciate the fact that you've done so much for so long to try to help educate people. And even though in the overall picture it looks very futile, I want you to know that there are a lot of lives that you have personally touched. And because they don't reach back, because they're afraid to even have anything to do with Utah or anybody that they knew in Utah, does not mean that you didn't touch their lives and set them on a new path. And I want you to know that.
Thank you. There is more to what we have been doing than simply putting words together and putting them between the book covers. There's a certain purpose behind it all, and that is to try to educate, and that is to try to touch some lives, and it is to try to rescue some souls. And there's a deeper purpose behind what we do. It's sad. It's frustrating. It's dispiriting to see the lack of understanding, the ignorance about something that is so terrible and horrendous. Every time I hear somebody say, "Let him be," it's kind of like, okay, you go drive through that community and look at 13, 14-year-old girls and say, "Let it be."
Most of the kids there don't know anything about the outside world. They really don't. We were homeschooled a lot, but even in school, we were taught the religion over and over and over. I didn't get history. I didn't get geography. I didn't get science. We were taught that dinosaurs were made up by Hollywood.
Well, again, it's why they don't vote for president, because Warren Jeffs is already president.
It's amazing to me that Warren Jeffs has so much power from prison. He's a prisoner. Why do they let him do that?
Because as being imprisoned, it sets him up for a certain level of martyrdom. He is the leader. He prepped them. They knew that there was something going on. The raid in Texas was one thing that they used to underscore what they called the persecution. And then as things progressed, they were fairly well prepared to understand that the law was going to go after Warren, and they were told that the law was going after Warren to persecute him, that he was a modern day martyr, and so that just hung in there. It took root. It took root into the foundation of what they were. That's why Warren still has the power that he has. He's a martyr. He's behind jail. He's sacrificing his life for them. That's what it's about. That's how he does it.
I understand the indoctrination of the people. What baffles me is the allowance of the government to let him use a phone and have communication when he's so absolutely dangerous and destructive.
Well, unfortunately, there are certain things that are part of the law. Just as he was entitled to have fair and adequate representation when he went to court, no matter how despicable he is and how terrible his acts were, as part of the system to protect the rest of the population that's innocent, that may find themselves in a bad situation. Yeah, it's bad. It's horrible that he can still do that. And, it's not anything that can be done, because he has still the right to communicate with people, and through them he passes on his word. So it becomes a matter of, okay, what can we do then on the other side, because we have a lot more liberty. I mean, we can walk around and we can breathe free air. You know, we can talk, we can try to persuade people, we can try to enact laws, we can try to remove people from political power that are allowing this to continue. We can actually do something. All he can do is just talk from a prison cell. And what his words are, yeah, they're powerful and they influence a lot of people. We can actually do more if people only would take the time to care.
Isn't it amazing how these guys that absolutely go crazy, literally insane with power? I mean, you know, look at Ervil LeBaron. He sent threatening letters to high officials and all of this and had a lot of people murdered. And, you know, look at Hitler. He actually went off his rocker with power. Absolutely insane. David Koresh. You can just name all these lists of people that really imagined that their power depended on controlling someone else. Everybody except themselves. Everybody except themselves.
Yeah, well, you know, it's a megalomania that occurs. They become bigger than the rest of the world, and they become invincible and strong and powerful, and nobody can supersede what they say or do. And it's unfortunate, but they also have a certain kind of charismatic thing about them. You know, Charlie Manson had a certain charismatic thing that drew people around him. Otherwise, he wouldn't have collected so many followers. Ted Bundy had a certain kind of charismatic character that allowed the young girls that he eventually murdered to trust him. You know, you mentioned Adolf Hitler. He had a certain kind of charismatic persona that was able to convince the population of Germany that he was the right thing. You don't do it just on luck. There's got to be these guys. I mean, yeah, we got to admit there's something there where they can punch the right buttons. There's a certain kind of a thing that occurs if they know how to push the right buttons, get your attention, and suck you in. And that's what they do. They're manipulative. They seem charming, but their agenda is nothing to do with charm or fairness or equality. They're manipulative, dangerous people.
One guy said that poison can come in a perfume bottle. We don't tend to want to think about that. If it looks okay on the cover, we don't look beneath.
Well, look at Warren Jeffs. Just look at a picture. He's a tall, skinny, gangly, very average guy. He doesn't speak well. He's got a terrible voice. But the words that he conveys and the position that he conveys them from are what offers the charisma, the power, the force that he's able to exert upon other people. You know, you look at him on the surface. He's a freak show.
I don't think he could have even got to first base if he hadn't been born the prophet's son and already been in the position to take over. And all the people, you know, the people were already indoctrinated. They already thought they were God's chosen people on earth and the only ones God loved. And I think that if they hadn't been already under a certain state of religious hypnosis, he never could have done it.
Well, that's very true. And that happens, you know, unfortunately, in not only the FLDS, but in a lot of other situations as well. You know, it's how they get sucked in. And it's, yeah. You are working from a base there, but there also takes some kind of a ability to use what manipulative forces you have available to you to know, that one is right. Okay, we can get that one into our midst, and this is how we can convince them that we're right. That we can be it's like a master criminal. I mean, they spend a lot of time figuring out how to do these incredible crimes, and they're pretty bright. They just, you know, they've got a lot of intelligence. It's just misapplied.
Use it all to destroy other people with and to suck the life and power and money out of everybody else.
It's tragic.
It is, and it's even tragic for them. Oh yeah, you can kill a lot of people and have a lot of wars, but it doesn't make you infallible. You're next.
There is some evidence to maybe lead us to believe that Warren Jeffs does understand who he is and what he is. There were quotes from when he was free and the investigations were all taking place. The direct quote is, "If they knew what I was doing, they would lynch me."
Yeah, I remember reading that. And also his kind of dramatic breakdown when he said, "I'm not a prophet," and admitted that he was a fraud. and then he told the people it was a test because they were willing to accept it as a test. So they flunked.
Well, that's because they were homeschooled, I guess. I don't know.
They flunked. Well, darn it, there are so many beautiful, innocent children born into that mess that it's really painful to just walk away and never look back. I couldn't do that myself. I understand it, but somebody needs to realize what is happening in American slavery in the United States today in the name of religion.
True. And we see it spreading. We see them not only having gone to Texas, but we see them in Colorado, in several rural locations. We see it in Pringle, South Dakota. We see it in Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, throughout the western states. We see it in western Canada. We see it in certain areas of Mexico, on the Baja and on the mainland. It's a lot larger than people comprehend. It's a lot more dangerous than people comprehend, and it's a lot more treacherous than they could ever comprehend.
I saw some of the alleged statistics on the numbers in cults, and I thought that they were just downright stupid. I don't know how else to put it. And I thought, that is ridiculous. My father had a small number of wives compared to some of these massive leaders like Warren and Rulon. Dad only had 6 wives, okay? And in the first generation of his children and grandchildren, there were way over 1,000 human beings. So if one man with 6 wives can produce way over 1,000 human beings, it would only take 9 men to make up the whole AUB. And we all know that that is not true, and there's nothing true about it.
Exactly. And it just, again, it's the lack of understanding and the veil of secrecy that takes place. You can walk throughout Utah, and if you know what you're looking for, you can spot where they are. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure it out. But nobody is, again, willing to do anything.
Well, the fact that lives can so easily be destroyed in the name of religion, and I understand it's okay to believe anything you want to believe, but when they use religion to take away human rights, I can't even see that that's American, let alone justified. I can't see that.
No. But that's what's happening, Rebecca. And it's been going on for quite some time, and it's not changing. Not even close.
Well, I want to thank you for your courage. I want to thank you most of all for being you. It's a pleasure to know you, and it's really a pleasure to occasionally get one of these great, insightful interviews from you. I hope our Skype is beautiful coming in from Mexico. It's a challenge. I have to laugh. I had come in late for the last interview that we did. I came in windblown, not realizing until I went to cut the film that my mascara was not waterproof, and I was like, dark mascara here. And your interview was so good. I thought, I think I ought to just put a brief on there and say, I'm forfeiting my pride for this because I'm saving this interview. Never mind pride and finesse. This is wisdom. You got to hear it anyway.
And it didn't show that way. It didn't look that way from where we were sitting. So
because you're wonderful, and I deeply appreciate the time and the inconvenience.
Oh, it's not
Ed, you know, the thing that is so grand, these things go on TV, then they go on my YouTube site, and then they go a lot of different directions. You're seen in Dubai, you'll be seen in England, you'll be seen in Australia. We have a following in Taliban nations, and I don't know how many more. It just spreads. And you know, you, like I said, you really honestly do not know the lives you touch. I was just so busy being me and having very little social life. I was in Salt Lake City, unannounced. There only one person knew that I was there, the one that picked me up at the airport. And I was walking down the street close to where I was staying to get something, and I heard a woman behind me say, "Wait, wait, please wait." I looked back, and there was nobody I knew. There was a young woman with a baby in her arms and a small child clinging to her skirt. So I continued to walk, and I heard this voice say, "Please wait." And I looked back, and I said, "Are you speaking to me?" And she said, "Yes." And I waited, and she came up out of breath, and she said, "You don't know me, but I'm your niece." And
Wow.
I have heard all of my life how horrible and bad you were. And she said, when I got old enough, I had a friend, and we looked you up on the computer, and she cried, and she said, "You've changed my life, and I just want to thank you."
Wow.
We stood on that street together and cried.
I can imagine.
And it really touched me deeply. I thought all of that was worth it.
It is, you know, and like I said, there's a purpose behind it all, and maybe we can accomplish a little bit at least. Hopefully, I don't know. We can try.
Well, you know, if we set one person free, we set a generation free after them.
True. True.
So it's worth it, and you have my deepest respect.
Thank you, and back to you.
Self-sacrifice.
Why do we do it?
Why do we do it?
Well, in our case, it's because it was ingrained in us as children.
Yes, that's true.
You know, it was like, that's what you had to do. A woman had to sacrifice herself to death because that's what we did.
Well, yeah, we were taught that we had a prepaid one-way ticket to hell if we didn't. We didn't have a choice.
Yeah.
We were wicked if we didn't.
Oh, if you even had an opinion of your own, you could go to hell just for having an opinion.
Yeah, thou shalt not think. Rule number 1. Blind obedience. When mom's too tired to really bother with them.
Mm-hmm.
When she's so exhausted that she just wishes she could go to her room and cry. A child can feel that. Now, what does that do to the kid's head?
They know they're not loved.
Either that or they grow up thinking, well, that's what women are for. They should suffer like that. They're lesser human beings. And here we come back to the original statement. Less than.
Less than.
Nobody's less than. It's a myth.
Right. So we need to stop holding ourselves in that position of less than.
It's terribly important for the health of the family,
for humanity, so quite honestly.
The nation, yes, for humanity.
For the entire planet. We need to stop holding ourselves as less than.
Mom suffered from depression and looked forward to death as a liberator to get her out of polygamy because it was the only way. And she really believed that she couldn't have anything nice because it would be evil. She couldn't do anything that was fun or nice because it would be evil. And she was totally, totally depressed and non-functioning with depression, and not even there for us with depression. So where did the self-sacrifice get her?
Apparently she thinks it's going to earn her a greater reward in heaven. I mean, I remember believing that when I was a kid.
But I remember
the more you suffer in life, the greater your reward in heaven.
Exactly, that's what they taught us. And suffering was really cherished, especially suffering of women.
Yeah.
Women should
they
suffer.
wore it like a badge of honor, how much they suffered.
Right.
Yeah. So you go through life being completely empty, completely depleted, and there's absolutely nothing of you. And we were expected to believe that that's what earned us a better place in heaven.
And that's what a good woman did.
And that's what a good woman did, was gave herself to death.
Right. And so a good woman, if she doesn't value herself, she can't value her life, so she can't function properly in her own life to really give. It's impossible. Mom couldn't. And I don't ever recall Mom taking her depression and turning it negatively, but she wasn't there for us, and that was turning it negatively in a different way.
Right.
Not in abuse and words, but she wasn't there for us. She actually wasn't there. She was too depressed.
She just internalized everything.
Right.
Yeah, I think my mom did that too.
Yeah. Very, very sad. Just gave up. She had no opinion. She had no voice. She had no value except to die for everybody else, and maybe she'd get in heaven.
Yep.
That's really sad.
It's very sad. And a lot of women today still do that to an extent. And I think they need to sacrifice their happiness for the happiness of others.
Living in servitude, it comes from depletion. Profound statement. How many women out there listening are living in servitude? A lot.
Yeah.
And a lot of them truly believe, just like we did, the way we were taught, that that's what a good woman does. She overlooks anything and any injustices and any disrespect done to her, and cries about it alone if she cries about it, or internalizes it and just keeps her mouth shut and sacrifices more. That is gradually killing a person, because you say they give pieces of themselves until they're gone.
Right. And what it does is it manifests as disease. I think like 98% of our diseases are stress related. And that comes from, I mean, what higher stress is there than giving yourself to death? Stress is an interesting thing on women's bodies. It affects us very differently. It also causes body fat.
Huh.
Interestingly enough. Yeah, there was some research that was done recently about that.
I can see that because on Sister Wives show, Cody Brown, when he took his fourth wife, Robin, into their polygamous family, all three of his other wives got fat. Right
Either
away.
that or it's because TLC was paying him a lot of money.
Well, interesting timing. They still had TLC before they had Robin. Robin was evidently very fattening for that family.
Yes.
She didn't get fat, but all the other girls did. And it's, you know.
That's interesting. Well, the three other girls kind of all grew up together. They had always known polygamy. That was normal. That was what their brand of normal was.
Right.
So, they married into that because it was part of their belief system, and they believe that they can't go to heaven without it.
Right.
Of course, they conveniently never mentioned on their show, but they really believe they can't go to heaven without polygamy. But I think because they all got married at about the same time, they were kind of grew up together. We're bringing this fourth woman into it, who is a lot prettier than they are. Sorry, ladies, but she is a lot prettier. And she upset the dynamics.
Yes. And they all gained weight.
Yeah.
Because of the stress. Very interesting. Very interesting.
It upsets the cortisol levels in a woman's body and creates body fat, belly fat.
So then, it isn't what the woman is eating that's causing the problem, it's what's eating her.
In a way, yes. I guess you could say that. That's funny. Competition is more of a masculine thing, and so competition for men actually becomes a game for them. Well, competition pits women against each other. That's not their natural environment. Women are much more collaborative. And in an environment where they're constantly battling for the husband's attention, they can't ever truly be who they are as women, to the extent that women have the ability to be, because they're always under guard. Well, for starters, their hearts are always on guard.
Right.
They can't have a loving relationship with themselves, because there's not only their immediate family, but there's also this extended family they have to sacrifice themselves for. They actually have to sacrifice their happiness for that.